Hey there, everyone on YouTube, as I am experiencing and growing myself and learning to embrace discomfort. So this is this challenge that I have taken on for myself for the next actually till the end of June, and this is 2021, so it's the end of June 2021, and so I have chosen and decided that, well, first, what I uncovered with my own coaching with myself and with a coach is that I was really, really fighting and not wanting to feel uncomfortable. And I didn't want to experience the emotion and the feeling of discomfort. So for the next 30 days, I have challenged myself to come live, do something live on social media in some fashion for until the end of June, actually. So it's slightly over 30 days. So this is, you'll start to see me going live here on YouTube, and I'll be here to answer questions. I'll be able to see the comments. So as more and more people become aware that I'm here live and find what I am teaching intriguing and it is impacting themselves too, and it's become very interesting for them, then you can come on and ask me questions, and I will give you my insight and what I've been learning so far, and even some coaching. So today's episode, it came to me, and part of what I'm doing and where I'm getting the ideas from is I'm actually taking I'm doing a future self work. So I'm doing future self work inside a 30-day challenge myself. And so this is what the idea came to me. My future self would feel comfortable doing YouTube Live, right? And so I am now bringing myself into my future self. I am now choosing to identify as a person that is comfortable with doing YouTube Lives. And so that really led me into today's topic because one of the lessons in there was about personality test and how personality tests can totally impact our lives. And so, and as I'm listening and I'm learning about that and impacting our lives from personality tests, I really started to think about, okay, how in my life have I allowed personality test or some form of testing to actually label me, right? And today's name of today's live is Let Go of Labels. Right? And so the big takeaway I got today was that to stop thinking labels and start thinking identity. So if you'll notice, this is why when I first started here is that I am now identifying as my future self, and my future self is comfortable doing YouTube lives and experience and realizing that discomfort is part of the journey, right? And so the label, and we're in the past, so let me get back to the three times for myself that I have come to realize I have really let things impact, and there's a lot of times that I have done it, but these are the three that I'm just going to share here so you can kind of see how maybe you are letting some form of testing that happened to you in your life. It gave you a label, and then you started to let that labeling change how you believed and you started really identifying with the label. So identifying with the label as opposed to identifying with who your future self or who you want to be or a dream that you have for yourself, right? And so when I was very young, and it was in third or fourth grade, I can't remember exactly which grade, but it was elementary school. And so I was did had to go through and experience some reading test. So I was labeled as a slow reader needing extra help, and so because I was labeled as a slow reader and I was put into one of the special ed classes for reading and for slow readers, right? I at that young age took on the label of dumb one, right? So that's really the label that I took on myself. The test gave me the label of slow reader, right? But I, at that young age, took on the label of dumb one. right? And so that's really that's the that I can recall really deeply is the first big impact a personality type test or type of testing impacted and led me to labeling myself. And this was way before I understood how to, many years before I understood how to ignite my own curiosity and the impact that actually my thoughts had on my feelings and my feelings on my actions, right? So this was way before that was there. And so that was the first time that I allowed labels to actually impact me. And then another time in my life that really, and so I took on that label and I really held that label for a very long time in a variety of ways in my life, right? And so then another time that I was going through some training for work, and it was before I was a flight attendant, and I was going through training some work, and they gave us one of those personality tests, right? And so the personality test, I can't remember which one it was, but it had to do with um, colors or something like that. Anyway, so this personality test said that this particular person would seem like on the outside they were like this duck sailing smoothly along the water, right? But yet underneath, how you see the duck with it, and well, you don't really see it; it's under the water, right? But the duck's feet are going like this, right? So internally, this person would always be feeling like this, chaotic, out of control, and not ever really letting it out and asking for help, right? And so I took on that label and I owned that label. And so I found it very challenging for me to ask for help. And I always felt internally inside chaotic and overwhelmed and out of control, right? And so then the other time that, and I still, this one is what I'm working on. So I'm growing and learning and always implementing the exit methodology, which is uncovering how, exploring how my thoughts are impacting my feelings, which are impacting my actions that I take, right? And so I do that with exploring, experimenting, examining, and then Xing out what isn't working, the thoughts that aren't working. And I get coaching now and I ask for help. And then I ignite my curiosity and I trust myself to figure things out. And it's really not in order, it's kind of circular. And I teach all about that on the podcast. And anyway, so that is actually, um, so the third one that I'm really working with now is because all of my life I have been an employee. So I have identified and I'm not well identified as an employee, taken on the label as an employee, right? And so now, what I want to do instead is I want to identify as an entrepreneur, right? And so at first, when I was living and believing this label of employee and identifying as employee, when it came to figuring things out and trusting myself really to figure out that I would know the next best action to take for where it is I am on this business journey, it took, it still does, it takes work for me to do that and to figure that out, right? And so this is where the work is and the coaching is coming in for me. So now what I want to help you with is to let go of labels and take on identity, the word identity instead, because I'm a big fan of labels, not labels, reframing words if the word impacts you negatively, right? And so in the work that I do and where I focus and really help is I help people exit the drinking life. That is the name of the podcast I have. And so where labels really impact that and the identity, the deep identity that people take on is that they're somehow not normal and flawed because they can't drink normal like everyone else, right? And society is labeled as them as alcoholics or addicts or someone that is out of control, right? And that they're hopeless. And so taking on all of that identity and then even taking on the identity of I am a drinker, the identity of a drinker, right? If you identify as and label yourself as a drinker, then, it's like, oh, okay, this is what I do. I drink alcohol. An identity of a wine drinker. Wine is my thing, right? And so all of that is impacting in there and taking on labeling. But yet, identity in the sense of how you can have it work for you is, who do I want to identify as? Instead of labeling and owning a label, how do I want to identify? I can create any identity I want for myself. I can believe anything I want about myself. How can I transform and focus away from labels and towards identity? And then what would that identity be? And so for myself, as you notice, I'm doing the episode here, and as I'm getting into it, I'm calming down a little bit, feeling a little more relaxed, and I'm identifying and starting to allow myself to identify as someone who can trust herself and figure this out, right? And feel the discomfort and own that it's going to be there and do it anyway, right? And so, as I was doing this research and thinking about how identities and labels and owning the ones that are impacting us negatively and aiming towards literally living into the label, I and how sometimes the labels, if we own them, the negative connotation of them, it really prevents us from visioning and envisioning even the impossible for ourselves. And so I also found stories on people that everyone would definitely label or assume and make the assumption that these particular individuals, when if they told you what their dream was, and as I get into this, you're going to know what their stories are. If they told you what their dream was, your thought would be, there's absolutely no way, and your deep held belief would be, there is no way these people can do these things, right? Okay, so the first person that I'm sharing this with you, and I will put a link underneath the YouTube description after it shows up on YouTube. And I'm also going to put this on the podcast, and I'll have the links inside the show notes for the podcast. But really, the first person, his name is Matt Stutzman, right? His name is Matt Stutzman, and he is an armless, yes, I said armless, archer. He is an archer, and he has no arms. So, of course, you would think, there is no way an armless person can be an archer. You can watch him on YouTube, and the link is, and you can even look him up, the armless archer, right? He literally had to shift his identity, right? From, first of all, in order for him to accomplish a lot of things, he had to shift his identity to make it not matter that he didn't have arms, right? And so his imagination had to really go into play, right? And what did he want for himself? And going towards his future and focusing on what he wanted and taking the focus off of his label, right? Armless, and taking it off of his label and putting it on. How did he want to identify? And for him, he wanted to identify as an archer. And he is now an archer, and he has become an archer. Right? Now the other person, her name is Jen Bricker, and she is a legless acrobat. Yes, you heard me, legless acrobat. She has no legs, right? So in order for her to become the legless acrobat, she needed to identify, think of her future self, put her imagination to work, and let go of the label of legless, right? And focus on identifying with what she wanted. She wanted to become an acrobat, and she identified as being an acrobat. And so I have a link to her story on also on YouTube, in the notes underneath YouTube here, or the show notes for the podcast. And then the last person, he's an inspirational motivational speaker, and his name is Nick Vujicic. Now, Nick Vujicic, he has no arms and no legs, yet he is able to climb stairs, get himself up on top of the stage, and then they actually have a table for him and get himself on top of the table. He does it himself, right? And so you know that he really had to put his imagination to work, right? So what I want you to like take away from this is ask yourself and ignite your curiosity around what, and really put yourself to work focusing on your future self, right? And ask yourself, how have I let labels impact my life? And what would it look like, feel like, sound like if I put my imagination, I want to take out the word if, to put my imagination to work and identify on what it is I actually want instead of owning the label that I might be owning right now. What would it be like to ignite my curiosity, put my imagination to work, and how do I want to identify? What identity do I want to take on? You guys have an awesome day. That's what I have for today's live, and I will be back here live again tomorrow.